So first, we need to make a mandrel to form the tube around. For me, one of the most difficult parts of making a composite tube has always been separating the mandrel at the end. I've usually used cardboard tubes, and even though they can tear apart pretty easily, it's still a pain. And a non-sacrificial tube is even more difficult. Aluminum can be used, but you either need to machine a taper into it with a lathe, which would be rather difficult with a tube this size, let alone a 10-inch aluminum tube, or have a big enough freezer for the aluminum to contract and then separate it out of the carbon fiber tube. Plastic, wood, fiberglass, all have similar issues. So the cheapest and easiest method is to use a cardboard concrete form tube, sometimes called sonotube. They'll be at the local hardware store in the masonry wing and come in all different sizes. Be sure to bring a tape measure because whatever size tube you go with will end up being your inner diameter. But for this build, I'm going to use a slightly different method. I used a router to cut out 2 circles just shy of what I want my final ID to be. Then I used a drill press and a hole saw to cut a hole in the middle of the wood form so I can mount it on a spit roaster. And then take some cardboard sheeting in roll form and wrap a few layers around the wood forms. The more layers I do, the more consistently circular the shape becomes. Now, it's very important that the mandrel can come apart later because you're going to need to get that tube out of it. And I can't stress that enough. It really is the most difficult part of doing any, composite tube work. So as you can see with this design, I can just unscrew the bolts at each end, pull the ends off, and then these struts in the middle just pull right out, making it so all I really have to do is remove the gooey cardboard on the outside, and then my tube is free. With any other kind of tube, you are just struggling and struggling and struggling to get that thing out. It's almost like a, do you remember those finger trap toys? That's basically what a carbon fiber tube will do once it cures. Now the skeleton of our mandrel is ready, so now we just need to skin it. Before I wrap the tube, I'm going to preset my calipers to my ideal inner diameter. I'm going to go about, well, it's going to be a 10-inch ID tube, but I'm going to set this to about a 1/16 of an inch smaller than 10, so that would be 9 15/16. That way there's a little bit of room left for the peel ply and for the plastic release film. So I like to use packing tape. Epoxy doesn't really stick to it. It's cheap and it's very thin, so it's not going to add any weird lumps or anything. So we're getting there. Probably do one more layer. Now it's nice with this method, the more layers you do, the more circular and round everything starts to kind of get. So what I'm trying to do here is just kind of sneak up on my ideal inner diameter. So this is looking pretty good. Yeah. So once I get the sizing I want figured out, I'm going to clamp a straight edge to the cardboard and then just cut it with a razor blade. With everything on this, I found it's really nice to work from the center of the tube out to the edges, no matter what you're doing, whenever you're taping down the peel ply, the cardboard, plastic release film, whatever. It's also really important to avoid getting wrinkles anywhere. Any imperfections in the mandrel, in the form, will come through and imprint themselves in the actual tube. I'm also going to lay some tape down over the seam, so that way it's not quite as, obtrusive. Again, this will imprint itself into the tube. It's on the inside, so it's not the end of the world, but the more I can reduce it, the better. Alright, now that my tube's just about ready, I'm going to triple check my measurements. Make sure I don't have any weird lumpiness going on anywhere. And yeah, everything seems good. Okay, so now I'm ready to coat the form, the mandrel, in some plastic release film. I like to use vacuum bagging film. Even though I'm not going to be drawing a vacuum on this, it's still nice, it still works really, really well for this purpose. So again, it's also very important to make sure you don't have any big wrinkles or anything anywhere. Unfortunately, this film comes folded. I end up putting it on the roll. If you can buy the film in roll form, it's much easier to work with. Silicone release fabric, otherwise known as peel ply. This is kind of a pain. It gets very wrinkly, nothing really sticks to it. So what I like to do is take a little spray adhesive, hit the mandrel with it, then just start sticking this on. Take a plastic squeegee, try to get all the wrinkles out as I go. Because again, any of these wrinkles are just going to come on through to the final form. I absolutely hate using the peel ply. I can never really get it on without a ton of little wrinkles. Do my best to smooth them all out, but no matter what I do, there's always a little bit. Now, this isn't too bad. This shouldn't show through too much in the final product. Big problem is if there's a big enough wrinkle and it will crease, then you'll see it in the inside of the tube. However, I plan on sanding the inside of the tube and flocking or painting it anyway, so not going to be the end of the world. But I really think I want to try one of these at some point without doing the peel ply at all, just the plastic release film, and see how that goes. It might turn out better, probably will, but this is what I've been doing, so this is what we're doing. So my tube is going to be 32 inches long, and since it's around a 10-inch diameter, it's also going to be right around 32 inches circumference. So I just need to make some squares. I'm actually going to cut 33 by 33 inches, so I have a little bit of overlap for the seams and for the edges to cut off later. So I learned this method of cutting straight lines in carbon fiber from a YouTuber named AJ Harmon Aero. What's really cool, carbon fiber is a weave. In this case, it's a 2x2 twill weave, but it basically means we have vertical and horizontal fibers all weaved together. So every weave is every row or column is a straight line. So all I got to do is take a pick and get it under the weave and just pull a little bit of one row out. Now I pulled it up. Take some pliers and pull it out, or even just grab it and go for it. Want to hold the other end taut and pull it right on out. And now you can see a line right there. So that line is an excellent guide for my scissors to go down. As long as I cut on that line, I know it's going to be straight. Keeping carbon fiber nice and straight is one of the hardest parts. Especially important if you're just going to do a raw carbon fiber finish, no paint or anything like that at the end. You want all the fibers oriented totally correctly. There we go. Nice straight line. Now I also need to prepare my wood sandwich material. I'm using a special kind of 1/8 inch thick plywood that has all the grain facing in one direction. So that means I can bend it around a radius in one direction. It really doesn't want to bend that way too much, but this way, very easily. So I've already measured my circumference. It's right around 32 inches, so I measured and cut this accordingly. You want to get this pretty exact. It's going to be tough because once you put your first layers of carbon fiber on, the radius, the diameter will change a tiny bit. If anything, it's better to have this too small and have a little bit of gap in there that you can then fill in later, rather than too big and you wrapped it around while your epoxy is already curing. You got to take it all off, it's sticky, cut it again, put it back on. That's just going to be a mess. So much better to have it a tiny bit on the short side, but as exact as possible is best. So we'll see. Still need to cut this to length, and again, it's going to be 32 inches. So you definitely want to clamp a straight edge before you make this cut. You can just use a regular razor blade. I'm just going to score it a series of times, and then eventually I'll make my way through. Perfect. So now it's the scary part. Time to mix our epoxy resin. First, we have to figure out how much to mix. I like to use a ratio of about 1:1 carbon fiber to epoxy resin when doing a hand layup. If you're doing vacuum infusion or other methods, it's more like a 70-30 or 60-40, depending on how good you are, really. But we're doing hand layup. I'm going to be using a lot of resin, especially with the plywood. That's going to soak some in. So I'm just going to go 1:1. So first, I'm going to take one layer of our carbon fiber. We're going to measure it. About 140 grams. Multiply that by 2, so 280 grams. I'm going to round up to 300 just to be safe. So I'm going to be using this Total Boat epoxy resin. Nothing special about it. It gets the job done pretty well, but I got a gallon of it on sale, so that's what we're doing. It's a 5:1 ratio. So the way I figure that, if we want 300 parts total, divide that by 6, the 5:1, 6 parts. Divide that by 6, we get 50. Multiply that by 5 is 250. So 250 grams of resin, 50 grams of hardener, 5:1. I'm also using a slow hardener here. This will give me a lot more working time. Once you get more experience with this, you can use fast. But even then, I like to just use slow. That means if something happens along the way or I gotta take a few steps back, I've got the time and I'm not racing the clock where this resin's gonna cure. You also wanna make sure you use a room temperature curing resin, unless you have an oven set up and you're gonna do that. But you're that far along, you don't need to watch this video. So we'll tear the scale, measure out 250 grams of resin. Close enough. Another 50 grams of the hardener. There we go. Now we just got to mix and 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 mix. You really need to mix this enough. If the hardener and resin aren't properly mixed all the way, it will never cure. And if that happens to you, there's nothing much you can do except for just throw everything out and start over. And that is very expensive. So spend like 5 minutes just mixing the hell out of it. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit of this on. I'm going to actually work a little bit of it into the peel ply using a little foam roller. This way, when I put the carbon fiber fabric on, it will kind of hold in place, like tack in place nicely. I also want to try to get this on nice and square as possible. And again, I like to start in the center and then work my way out to the edges. That way I can remove any wrinkles or creases as I go. You really want to saturate it, but you don't want to put it on like wet because then it's just going to drip everywhere. For this first layer too, I'm not that worried if it's a little excessive epoxy because it's just going to soak into the next layers. Important thing is that I get it on here straight and even. Probably dumped too much on right there, but I'm just gonna get it nice and spread around real quick. You can also use a little plastic Bondo scraper to help get the epoxy and work it into areas that are a bit on the drier side. This also helps push out wrinkles to the edge. Alright, so now I'm ready for my next layer. This one, I'm actually going to alternate the direction of the grain. by 90 degrees. Because this is a 2x2 twill, I actually get more strength out of all of it if I'm alternating the grain direction. And since it's square, it's very easy. And it is much nicer now that the first layer is kind of on there and tacky to get my next layer oriented correctly. Again, start in the center, kind of work my way out. Really work that seam down too. All right, so this is fully wetted out. I'm going to probably mix a little bit more epoxy and then apply that to my wood. All right, so sorry that I'm way over here. I'd move the camera, but I'm covered in epoxy. This stuff is curing. I got to move quick. So I'm just going to, put a little bit around on here. I'm going to take my foam roller and we're going to just work it into the wood. So I don't need to get super heavy. I just need to kind of wet it all a bit. So then when the epoxy that's soaked into this wood and the epoxy that's soaked into the carbon fiber meet, they become fast friends. Also, be careful to keep everything, somewhat clean. Don't need a bunch of rocks and dirt and rat droppings getting into your composite. Now this is time for the really tricky part. I need to get the wood wrapped around here, clamped in place, and then, somewhat in a good position, because once it's all on here, I don't want to mess with it again. First, I'm going to try to get the seam in the wood kind of opposite the seam that I had in the cardboard here. That way that can kind of help push it into place. So I'm going to rotate that to the bottom. And I've also, if you notice, I've got all my big 12-inch hose clamps right here, kind of ready to go. So once I get it on there, I can just kind of toss them around and go right into it. Now I've got this piece of 1/4 inch thick, 1 inch wide aluminum, and I'm going to have that go over the seam and have the clamps kind of rest on top of that. So that way I'm not dealing with a complete nightmare of a flat spot in the tube. I'll loosen all these other guys a little bit. Now you don't want to completely clamp down on these, make them too tight, because then you'll put a big flat spot into the top of the tube. A little bit of a flat spot is kind of inevitable with this method, but you know, you can kind of eyeball it and see what's happening. If it looks like it's a little too flat, you can you know, loosen each one a little bit. It's not going to go anywhere. I like to brush a little bit of my leftover epoxy kind of in the edges here. That way I'm not going to have any gaps and I get a really nice bond, because if this ever delaminates, it'll probably be from around here. Alright, so now this just needs to cure. So I'm going to take the whole thing, set it aside overnight, then tomorrow morning we'll come back out and continue with our next few layers. Okay, so it's the next day. The epoxy is cured overnight. We're ready to take off the clamps and the bar and see how things are looking. First thing we'll note though is it's already kind of crappy looking at the edges. This doesn't matter. This is all going to get cut off right at the edge of the wood, so I'm not too concerned with this. This just happens, it gets smushed out when we clamp the whole thing in. I'm not too worried about that. As long as the middle part is round and smooth, we're good. So let's get started. One other thing I'll note is I put packing tape around this aluminum bar, so that way it's not going to stick to the epoxy. There we are. So we still have a little bit of a seam, but that ain't nothing. So we could either fill that in with epoxy, or, you know, if it's even deeper, we use like a fiberglass reinforced body filler. Basically just Bondo with fiberglass strands in it for strength. This is small enough where epoxy will be fine. So I'll probably, yeah, I'm just going to fill this in when I do the overall carbon route. One thing is, you know, we did get some epoxy dripping out and all other weird stuff on the edge. So probably going to take some sandpaper and just kind of go over the whole thing to smooth it out before we put our next layers on. And here I'm just using some 120 grit on a block. You know, not too worried about getting this perfectly smooth. The carbon fiber layer we put on top will do a bit of filling for us. All right, so we're sanded, we got it cleaned off. I think we're ready to put some more CF on. Same as before, cut out two 33 by 33 inch sheets of carbon fiber. Some more epoxy resin. So first thing I'm going to do is get a little thin coat of resin on the whole bit of wood, so that way I can make sure that you know, the epoxy is soaked in. Oop. That's not good. There we go. Yeah, I really want the epoxy to soak in. I don't want to risk any delamination or anything down the line. So, you know, doesn't have to go in heavy. But just get the whole thing kind of wetted out. And honestly, it looks kind of nice, like as a finish. So I don't know, it might be cool one day to just finish the telescope like this, like do 4 layers of carbon on the inside or something, and then a wood shell. I've seen a lot of people try to make wooden telescope tubes, and it's always kind of weird. But this method, I think, kind of works. All right, so it's fully wetted out. We're ready for our first layer. I'm going to try to match my carbon fiber seam with the wood seam right here. That way there's like double overlap over this, because this is, you know, probably the weakest part of the whole thing. Not that it really will make a difference, but got to start somewhere. What's nice with wetting the whole thing out ahead of time is it gives you a nice tacky layer here. And once again, we'll start in the center and work our way out. So now we'll do our final layer. You'll see I have this one pesky strand here. I'm just gonna carefully pull it out. Just mixing up a little bit more. Just kind of want to flood the top layer out. Probably do another layer of epoxy once this cures, you know, sand it down and all that. But you really want to make sure that the fabric is fully saturated. And I see there's a few spots that look a little drier than I'd like. So just apply a little bit more and then set it aside to cure overnight. This is a good stopping point. Everything's nice and saturated. Put a little bit of extra epoxy on the seam. That way I can, you know, sand that area a little more since it's going to be lifted and not worry about going through. And we'll just let this chill now to cure and see you tomorrow. All right, so it's the next morning. The tube has cured. There's one bit I added that we didn't film, is I ended up wrapping each end with some plastic. That way, you know, the ends were kind of wanting to stick up, so this kept them nice and tamped down so I didn't have any delamination. The edges are a little rough looking, but that doesn't matter because I'm cutting that part off. So, pull some of this up so you can see what I mean. And yeah, for this, I just used some of those same strips of the plastic release film. Just find the seam. And yeah, you can see there's some crappiness here. That doesn't matter since we're cutting it right here. So all this is just sacrificial, that's gone. I can also say it gives you quite a nice surface finish. In retrospect, I kind of want to try wrapping the whole tube in that at the end. The only thing I'm worried about is if it puts any big creases into the carbon fiber or anything like that. I'm not super concerned with surface finish here because I'm going to be sanding all this, priming it, and painting it anyway. So yeah, just figured I'd save myself the hassle of more potential wrinkles and all that crap. So yeah, so let's get this off the mandrel now and see what we're working with.
So I'm also going to try to do this without completely destroying the cardboard. That way I can reuse it, save a couple bucks. All right. That's it. So, much easier than every other method I've done in the past. Now we're just gonna start peeling out the release fabric, or the we're pulling out all the plastic release film. I'm gonna peel up the peel ply. This is a little tougher. Got to put some effort into it. Also be careful, all these sharp edges on the carbon. Cut your wrists up a bit. Alright, and that's it. So you can see the finish left by the peel ply is kind of nice and flat. You can also see the finish, where I just had tape is a little shinier. I'm going to be sanding it down anyway, so that doesn't matter, but this peel ply leaves a really nice finish that we can, then add paint and primer and paint, or flocking, or whatever. Yeah. This is very stiff, but there is one more test that we need to do. So yeah, pretty good. So the best method I've found to cut carbon fiber is to use one of these cheap little wet tile saws. I already had one since we redid our bathroom tile a couple years ago, and it's just been sitting around. But basically it's a little diamond wheel. The bottom is a tray full of water, so it brings that up. And that way when you're doing a wet cut, you're not going to have toxic carbon fiber dust coming out in the air and breathing it everywhere. It keeps it very, very clean. It's kind of messy, so I put some plastic sheeting down on my workbench. The water does get everywhere, but it's for pretty much all my carbon fiber cutting. I try to stick with this. It's also nice because you can add a fence and do some straight lines for other purposes, but for now, I'm just going to put the tube back on the rotisserie, suspend it right over here, and I can just kind of rotate the tube into the blade, giving me a nice square cut all the way around. Perfect. Cool. And so now I'm going to sand all these edges, nice and smooth and flat. Don't have to go too crazy here, just want to get any imperfections out. We're going to be doing another coat of epoxy kind of in this seam just to fill it up. And since we are dry sanding, we really want to wear a dust mask for this. Again, carbon fiber dust is some nasty stuff. And so now, we're going to sand the face of it, taking extra time to kind of get the seam nice and flat. Again, I'm painting this whole thing. I do not care about preserving a perfect carbon fiber finish, so if I go through the epoxy, which I will, it's not the end of the world. Now that I got the whole thing kind of roughly sanded down with the power sander, I'm going to come back by hand and just start going over it. I like doing some by hand because you can really get a feel for any high and low spots, any areas that need attention that you just don't get with the power sander. I already feel that the seam barely even there. So, yeah, just keep doing this until you're happy. If you're ever happy. Now you do want to take special attention to try to keep this edge nice and square. Mostly, it'll just look nicer than if it's all lumpy. So, you know, when you're sanding that way, put the weight up on this part of the tube. When you're sanding here, try to have, you know, two spread out points of contact. Keep it 90-degree angles from each other. Should also note that the amount of sanding is directly proportional to A, how nice you want the finish to be, and 2, how much prep work you did correctly. The sloppier the prep work, the sloppier the final form. Also, if you don't really care how this looks, you just want a carbon fiber tube, this is already good enough to start drilling holes and mounting things in. But I'd like this to be nice, so I'm going to keep going until I don't care anymore. And that's pretty much how you know you're done sanding, when you just don't care anymore.
So we're going to triple check our inner diameter. Should be right around 10 inches. And yeah, sure enough, looks like we're just about there. Maybe a tiny bit over. I'm going to rotate and take a few measurements. So I'm looking at maybe 10 and a 16th, but I'm going to call it 10 because I know I'm going to end up painting the inside, flocking it, you know, adding a little bit of thickness. So I think if we cut all of our internal bits to 10-inch OD to fit in this 10-inch ID, we'll be good. Let's move on. All right, so the tube is pretty much ready for us to move on to the next step. A few little notes. Using this method with the cardboard mandrel and all that, it's never going to be perfectly flat all around, or, you know, a perfect circle. Like I've got one little flat spot here from where the hose clamps went down. It's really not a big deal. I can actually take this section and kind of hide this. Like I'll have the focuser here, the Losmandy dovetail here. So this part won't even really be visible. And it's really just an aesthetic thing. It's not going to affect the function, as long as you're not like crazy out of round. You don't want an oval tube or something like that. This is mostly circular with a little bit of a flat spot there, but I'm not too worried about it. Still have a bit of work to do before this tube is finished. We've got to drill the hole for the focuser, drill holes for mounting the primary cell, the secondary spider, all that. But I'm not going to worry about that just yet, nor am I going to worry about doing our finish sanding, prime, and paint. The tube's probably going to get a little banged up in the process of making all the other parts, so I want the freedom to be a little rough with it if I need to, in haste of getting everything else done. Then once all the other parts are complete, we can start drilling our holes, do some testing, and get this thing finished and painted and looking good. But for now, this is a great spot to move on to the next step. Thanks for watching.